Tessa Martin woke up before the alarm went off. She did it every time, out of habit, out of instinct, because of that dull ache that for months had been settling beneath her ribs like an unwanted guest. She sat up slowly in bed, careful not to wake Nina, whose room was right next door. Around her, the room was kept in almost surgical order. Medication bottles lined up on the bedside table, an open diary with notes in shaky handwriting, and a digital recorder on the dresser, its red light blinking. Every night, when her daughter was sound asleep, Tessa recorded small voice capsules, messages that one day, not so far in the future, Nina would listen to. She didn't talk about the illness, not directly. She told her about love, about moving forward, about how not to let pain steal the most valuable thing, the joy of living. The illness progressed mercilessly, but Tessa carried on, pretending everything was fine. In public, she smiled gently. In private, she allowed herself to break down, only as much as necessary. Her music shop, small but cozy, was the refuge where she still felt useful, where she taught children to play the piano, and where sometimes she lost herself playing for herself when no one else was listening. She had stopped singing at weddings since David left, since he left her for Alison, the woman with the perfect smile and eternal promises. She didn't hold a grudge, or so she told herself, but she had learned to walk on her own, or so she thought, until an unexpected letter arrived in her mailbox with familiar handwriting and a tone that seemed to hide something more than courtesy. Alison asked her to sing at her wedding. Tessa read the letter several times. There were no spelling mistakes, no typos. It was perfect, like everything that came from Alison, but there was something about that perfection that hurt more than any hurtful words. "We would be thrilled if you were the one to sing at our ceremony," it said. Not "I would be thrilled, we." That feigned plurality pierced her. For a few seconds, she considered ignoring it, throwing the letter away, blocking the number, pretending she'd never received it. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, reread it once more, and, in an act she didn't fully understand, dialed Alison's number. She accepted, without conditions, without explanation. Not for David, not out of politeness, but for something deeper, because maybe, in that last performance, she could say with her voice everything she never said with words. If this moment touched you, don't leave without doing something. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories like this one. Nina knew nothing. Tessa kept the secret with the same discipline with which she took her medication or recorded her nightly messages. Over the next few days, she practiced in silence, when Nina went out with friends, or when she locked herself away doing homework with loud music playing. She chose a song she knew by heart, the prayer. Not because it was religious, but because it was honest. Each note was like a prayer without faith, but with truth. The same truth that was beginning to grow in her chest, and that she couldn't hide much longer. But not yet. First, she had to sing. She had to go on stage one last time, and do it with all the dignity she still had. The wedding day arrived with a bright sun that contrasted cruelly with the state of her body. Tessa dressed calmly, as if each garment had a ceremonial purpose. She chose an emerald dress she had saved for a special occasion, unaware that this occasion would be her last. She applied her makeup with precision, covering the dark circles under her eyes, the fatigue, the traces of the treatment. But she didn't put on her wig until the very end. She stared at herself in the mirror for several minutes, silently assessing the face she barely recognized. "Just one more night," she said to herself softly. Then she heard Nina running down the hall, looking for her slippers, oblivious to everything. Tessa smiled tenderly and walked down the stairs with a firm step, keeping the trembling of her legs to herself. The Napa Valley vineyard looked like something out of a postcard. Tables decorated with white flowers, glasses lined up like crystal soldiers, and a dance floor that reflected the sky. Tessa arrived alone, refusing to accept the ride offered by Alison. She didn't want to owe them anything. She was greeted by a coordinator. Wearing a headset and a programmed smile, who guided her to a small room behind the stage. There, a piano, a microphone, and a thick silence awaited her. For a few minutes, Tisa sat in front of the instrument, letting her fingers run over the keys with the clumsiness of someone remembering a sleeping tongue. She closed her eyes, breathed, and waited for the signal. When the master of ceremonies introduced her, "A very special guest will be giving us a song that means a lot to the bride and groom." Tisa took the stage with a calm that came not from her body but from her soul. The audience, mostly strangers, applauded politely. Allison smiled from her table, immaculate in her white dress, clinging to David's arm as if he were a trophy. He, for his part, couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he saw her, not out of surprise, but out of bewilderment. Tessa was no longer the woman he had left behind. Something was different, a light that was both melancholic and powerful, like a flame. In its last seconds of oxygen, the first notes of La Plegaria floated softly in the warm evening air. Tessa's voice, though marked by physical fragility, retained a purity that touched deeply. It wasn't a technical performance, it was a confession. As the melody progressed, emotion took over, drawing the audience with it, who began to fall silent, listening with real attention. In the second verse, Tessa felt a sudden vertigo. Her legs trembled, the microphone tilted. For a second, fear pierced her like a dagger, but she didn't stop. Instead, with a slow, determined gesture, she removed her wig in front of everyone. And in that act, she broke the script of the evening. The gesture left the audience in a state of silent shock. Some lowered their gaze, others froze, unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath. David visibly tensed, as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Allison, still smiling, took a few seconds to react. But Tessa wasn't looking for pity or scandal. With her head uncovered and her gaze fixed on the horizon, she firmly took the microphone again and continued singing. Her voice, now free of the burden of hiding, grew deeper, more luminous. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was her farewell, her truth, her victory. Did you feel anything in this part? Then stay with us, subscribe and join us for every new story worth telling. When she finished, there was no immediate applause, only a long silence charged with something new. Then, as if awakening from a dream, the guests stood up one by one, applauding with a mixture of respect and awe. No one knew exactly what they had witnessed, but they sensed it hadn't just been a performance. It was a revelation. Tisa walked off the stage unhurriedly, her eyes slightly moist and her heart pounding. She headed toward the exit without looking for anyone, but before she crossed the door, she heard a trembling voice behind her. It was David. "Tisa," she stopped without turning around. "Thank you," he said. She didn't respond. She just walked toward the car, where something more urgent was waiting for her, to tell her daughter the truth. On the way home, the silence between her and Nina was almost unreal. The teenager didn't suspect anything unusual. She had assumed her mother had gone to a meeting or some other event. Tisa watched her daughter's reflection in the car window as she drove. She wanted to stop time, capture that moment when Nina didn't yet know. But she also understood that she couldn't keep pretending. That night after dinner, she called her into her room. They sat together on the bed, facing each other. Tessa took a deep breath and, in a soft but firm voice, told her everything. The diagnosis, the estimated time, the reasons why she had kept silent. Nina didn't say anything at first. She just stared at her, her eyes wide open, filled with disbelief and suppressed rage. Then she burst into tears. She threw herself into her mother's arms and sobbed like she had when she was a child. Tessa hugged her tightly, feeling how each tear tore something inside her. There were no reproaches, only pain, and one question that hung in the air. "What do we do now, Mom?" Tessa didn't have all the answers, but she told her the only thing she could promise with certainty: we're going to make the most of every second we have left. That was the first night in a long time that they slept together, without barriers or lies between them. The following days were filled with a different kind of tenderness. Nina, though hurt, became protective. She began accompanying Tessa to her medical appointments, organizing her medications and cooking her breakfast with fruit cut into star shapes. It was her way of fighting the inevitable. Tessa, for her part, became more talkative. She told stories from the past, about singing at weddings, about Nina's pranks as a child, about the dreams she once had and the ones she had yet to share. They laughed, cried, and cooked together. Each simple gesture became something sacred, another thread in the invisible fabric that bound them together. One afternoon, while sorting through old sheet music in the music store, Nina discovered the digital recorder. "What is this, Mom?" she asked. Tessa tensed for a second, but then smiled. "They're messages for you, for when I'm gone." Nina looked at her silently, her eyes glassy. She didn't need to hear any of them to understand their meaning. From then on, every night before going to sleep, she asked her mother to record a new one, but with her present. "I want to hear you now, Mom, not later." So the nightly recordings became a shared ritual, an act of love in the present, not in the future. The change was also noticeable at the music store. Tessa's students, noticing her growing weakness, began to come accompanied by their parents, who offered to help with simple tasks, arranging instruments, cleaning sheet music, serving tea. The community, without asking too many questions, understood that something was wrong, and they responded with love. One day, an 8-year-old boy brought a flower picked from his garden and left it on the piano with a note that read, "May it heal soon." Tessa couldn't hold back her tears. That place, more than a source of income, was her emotional home, a reflection of what she had built with love and perseverance. One Saturday afternoon, Nina proposed an idea that surprised Tessa. "What if we record a video, one of you, singing?" At first, Tessa resisted. She felt vulnerable, lacking the physical strength and steady voice she once had. But Nina insisted. "Not for others, for me, for when I miss you so much." That phrase was enough. They set up the room, used makeshift lights, and Tessa chose a simple song, one she used to sing to her as a child, "Volverás." She performed it with a broken voice, but charged with emotion. When she finished, Nina hugged her in silence, knowing she had captured something eternal. More than a song, it was a piece of her mother's soul. The video became something bigger than they imagined. Nina, without telling Tessa, delicately edited it, adding images from her childhood, beautiful everyday moments. Her mother laughing in the kitchen, tuning a violin, petting her cat. She posted it on social media with a simple dedication, "To the bravest woman I've ever known." Within hours, messages from strangers began arriving, people touched by the sincerity of the performance, by the story behind. Those tired but bright eyes. Tessa, upon hearing this, wasn't upset. She smiled with resignation and tenderness. "I guess I'm not just yours anymore, huh?" she said to Nina, caressing her face. The repercussion brought something unexpected. A local music producer contacted Nina, offering to record a small album of Tessa's favorite songs, not for commercial purposes, but as a legacy. At first, Tessa hesitated. Her energy was low, her strength dwindling every day, but something inside her, a rebellious spark that hadn't been extinguished, told her she had to do it. Not for fame, but to leave something behind beyond memories. So began the home recording sessions, with borrowed microphones and musician friends taking turns accompanying her. Each song was a farewell, yes, but also a declaration of love for life. During one of those recordings, while performing an old ballad she used to sing in her youth, Tessa collapsed. Her body didn't respond. The song stopped mid-song, her voice cracked, and a stabbing pain shot through her abdomen. The musicians froze, and Nina ran to her, her face contorted. They called emergency services and took her to the hospital. It was the first time Tessa couldn't hide the severity of her condition. In the white room, hooked up to machines, she took her daughter's hand and whispered, "I don't regret anything, except not telling you sooner." Nina wept silently, caressing her mother's bony fingers. She knew the end was near, but she wasn't ready. "You never The doctors were clear. There were weeks, maybe days left. Tisa asked to go home. She didn't want to spend her last hours among tubes and fluorescent ceilings. At home, surrounded by her loved ones, she organized everything meticulously. She left notes stuck in books, letters hidden among sheet music, simple instructions about payments and keys. Every gesture had a purpose, to ensure Nina wouldn't have to carry unnecessary uncertainty. One night, she asked her to open a wooden box kept in the closet. Inside were photos, old recordings, and a letter with her name in bold letters. "When I'm gone, open this calmly. Not before. Not if you can help it." Nina nodded, tears in her eyes, promising to respect her wishes. The days at home took on a slow but purposeful rhythm. Visitors began to arrive, former students, neighbors, even some clients who had once bought a sheet music or asked for advice on a serenade. They all came to say thank you. Tessa greeted them with a gentle smile. Sitting in her favorite chair, a blanket over her legs and a cup of tea in her hands. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in silence, holding hands. Each encounter was a farewell without needing to name it as such. The atmosphere was charged with an unusual peace, as if everyone knew there was nothing more important than this present moment. One afternoon, David arrived. He didn't ask permission. He simply rang the doorbell, carrying a bouquet of flowers wilted by the heat and a defeated expression on his face. Nina opened the door, hesitated for a second, and then let him in. Tisa looked at him from her armchair, not moving. He approached with unsteady steps and knelt in front of her. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only whispered, "I didn't know how to take care of what I had." Tessa didn't respond immediately. She watched him tenderly, but also with distance. Finally, she touched his face and said, "It doesn't matter anymore, David. Just live better. For you, for her." Nina watched them from the doorway, understanding for the first time that love doesn't always require justice. Sometimes it just needs closure. That night was different. After David's visit, Tessa seemed lighter, as if by loosening that last knot of the past, she could fully surrender to the present. She asked Nina to read aloud to her from one of her favorite books. She chose a passage that spoke of the courage to be vulnerable. As her daughter read, Tisa closed her eyes and smiled, not at the content, but at the voice, that voice she had loved so much since hearing her first cry. "Don't let the world dim you, Nina," she whispered at the end. "Shine bright, even if everything trembles." That was the last sentence she spoke before falling asleep. She didn't wake up that night. Dawn was silent. The sun filtered gently through the curtains, as if it knew it should enter slowly. Nina, sitting next to the armchair, still holding the book, understood without needing to touch her. Fat tears rolled down her face, but she didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't call anyone immediately. She stood there, caressing her mother's already cold hand, whispering over and over, "Thank you. Thank you for not leaving without teaching me how to stay." When she finally made the call, she did so with a firm voice. Because even though her heart was breaking, she had learned something essential. Love doesn't die with the body. It is transformed. The following days were a mix of formalities, tears, and spontaneous tributes. The music store was filled with flowers, letters, and dedicated scores. People Nina didn't even know stopped by to leave something, to tell a brief anecdote, to say that Tessa had changed their life. That's when Nina made a decision. She wouldn't close the store. She would transform it into a living space of memory and music. She placed a sign at the entrance that read, "Mom's voice is still here," and beneath it, a bench with headphones, where anyone could sit and listen to the recordings Tessa had left behind. Her voice, her laughter, her advice, everything continued to vibrate within those walls. On the day of the official tribute, the room was packed. Students, neighbors, musicians, even a few curious onlookers who had seen the viral video. Nina took to the small stage, a notebook in her hands, her heart beating a mile a minute. "I am not my mother," she began, "but I am her echo. And if you are here, it is because something of her lives on in you too. Then, instead of a long speech, she played one of her favorite recordings, one in which Tessa spoke of the courage of showing up without masks. As her voice echoed in the room, many bowed their heads, others smiled through tears. It was as if, for a few minutes, Tessa had returned to say, "I am fine, and you will be too." After the tribute, Nina was left alone in the store. She turned off the lights, but didn't leave. She walked among the shelves, played the sheet, music, and sat down at the piano that had been her mother's daily altar. Her fingers trembled at first, but then they found a melody. It wasn't perfect nor precise, but it was hers. For the first time in a long time, she felt she could play not to please, but to feel. She closed her eyes and let the chords flow without judgment. When she finished, she noticed someone had opened the door. A girl in a school uniform, looking at her shyly. "Are you Tessa's daughter?" she asked. Nina nodded. "Do you teach classes too?" Nina smiled, her eyes still moist. "I'm just starting," she replied. Thus began a new era. Nina didn't replace her mother, but she continued her work. She kept the store open, began teaching classes, and organized small community concerts where children played in front of their families. Every time a note sounded, she felt her mother accompanying her. And every time a student said, "I can't," she responded with the same words Tessa used to say, "Of course you can. Just breathe and feel." Over time, the fear subsided and music once again filled the space. It wasn't a memorial to mourning. It was a place where life continued to vibrate, where the legacy of a voice hadn't faded, but had changed shape. 3 months after Tessa's departure, Nina found the strength to open the wooden box her mother had left her. She did so on a Sunday morning, as the sun timidly shone through her bedroom window. Inside was more than she expected. Letters with her name on them, old photos, with notes on the back, sheet music with little hearts drawn in the margins, and a notebook full of reflections Tessa had written during her final months. There were phrases like, "If you're reading this, it's because you survived the first winter without me," and more practical ones. "Remember to change the water filter every 3 months." Nina laughed and cried at the same time, clutching each piece of paper as if she could still smell her mother's perfume. Among all the letters, one was marked in red ink, "For when you feel like you can't go on." Nina hesitated to open it. Was this the moment? Had she already hit rock bottom or not yet? But something inside her whispered to her to do it. The letter read, "Nina, if you made it this far, it's because you're fighting. It doesn't matter if you fell. The important thing is that you're still standing. Don't try to be strong all the time. Just be honest. Cry if you need to. Scream if it relieves you, but don't fade away. Your light is different from mine, but just as necessary. Live, my love. Live for yourself, not for me. I am at peace now." After finishing reading it, Nina lay down on the bed and let the tears flow freely, without shame. That day, after reading the letter, Nina made a decision she'd been putting off, enrolling in university to study music pedagogy. For years, she'd thought she wasn't good enough, that she was merely in her mother's shadow. But now she understood that it wasn't about replacing Tessa, but rather continuing a story in her own way. In the entrance interview, when asked why she wanted to be a teacher, she answered without hesitation, "Because music saved me, and I want to help others find themselves in it too." The examiner looked at her silently for a few seconds, then smiled. "Welcome, Nina." When she returned home that afternoon, she found 2 children waiting outside the store with their parents. They wanted lessons. Nina opened the door with a smile and invited them in. Inside, the scent of wood, framed photos of past concerts, and Tessa's invisible presence seemed to envelop everything. During the lesson, one of the children missed a note several times. Frustrated, he looked at Nina with tears in his eyes. She knelt beside him and said, "It doesn't matter how many times you miss the mark. It matters that you keep trying. Every note has its moment, and so do you." The boy nodded, tried again, and succeeded. In that instant, Nina felt something inside her heal a little more. As the months passed, the store became a landmark in the neighborhood, not only for the classes, but for the welcoming space it represented. Some came just to chat, others to leave flowers under Tisa's photo hanging in the entrance. One day, an older woman showed up with a box of cassettes. "Your mother taught me to sing when I was your age," she said. "I want this to stay here." Nina hugged her without saying anything, moved by the discovery of how profound her mother's impact had been. In the back room, she installed a new shelf, Tisa Archive. There she began to store everything she received, everything that spoke of her mother without words. But it wasn't all nostalgia. Nina also began to compose her own songs, simple, charged with raw emotions. Some spoke of fear, others of hope, and many of that sweet and bitter mix of missing someone every day. She recorded one of them on her cell phone and uploaded it to the same account where Tisa's video was. She titled it, "Letter to Mom." Within a few hours, she began receiving messages from people who said they felt reflected in her, supported. One woman wrote, "I lost my mother 2 years ago, and this song gave me peace. Thank you for lending your voice to those who still don't know how to express their pain." Nina understood then that she was beginning to build her own legacy. One Sunday afternoon, while sorting through old sheet music, Nina found a crumpled sheet of paper among the books. It was a list, handwritten by Tessa, titled "Things I Still Want to Do." Some were crossed out: "Sing in a vineyard," "Make up with David," "Tell Nina the truth," but others remained intact. "See the sea with Nina," "Write a song together," "Dance in the rain without fear of catching a cold." Nina stared at those sentences for a long time, her heart heavy. Then, without thinking much about it, she grabbed a new notebook, wrote, "Things I'm going to do for both of us," and copied each item on the list. She knew some of them couldn't be fulfilled exactly as they were, but that didn't mean they couldn't be transformed into something new. The following week, she organized a trip to the coast. They had never gone to the sea alone, and now they would. Upon arrival, the salty wind and the sound of the waves enveloped her with a force she hadn't expected. She walked along the shore, barefoot, headphones in, listening to one of her mother's recordings. "If you get to the sea, think of me. I'll be there, in the foam, in the warm sun, in your laughter when I splash against the water." Nina sat on the sand and cried, not from sadness, but from presence. Because in that moment, even though her mother was no longer physically there, she felt her in everything. And for the first time since her departure, she was able to say out loud, "I'm fine, Mom, we're making it." After the trip, Nina returned with renewed energy. She decided to start a free workshop at the store. Music for healing, aimed at people who had lost someone. It wasn't about being an expert musician, but rather connecting with emotions through sounds, words, and silences. The first session was small, just 5 people, but the atmosphere was so sincere that by the end, everyone was hugging each other as if they had known each other their whole lives. One of the attendees, an older man who had lost his wife, said to her, "Thank you for reminding us that grief can also be tuned like an old guitar, with patience." Nina knew then she was exactly where she was meant to be. One night, while closing the store, she happened to turn on Tessa's digital recorder. It still had memory, still contained unheard messages. She pressed play and heard her mother's soft voice, as if speaking from another room. "If you made it this far, it's because you had courage. I'm proud of you, Nina. I know you'll do beautiful things with what's left of me. And if you ever doubt it, just sing. Your voice will know where to go." Tears sprang forth without warning. But this time, they didn't hurt the same. Because they weren't of loss, but of continuity. Because now, each word wasn't a goodbye, but a momentum. Inspired by that last recording, Nina decided to finish the album Tessa had started, but was never able to complete. She recovered the recorded tracks, improved the sound with the help of a producer friend, and included some new songs composed by her that echoed her mother's lyrics. The project was called Intertwined Voices. The cover features a simple illustration, two silhouettes singing in opposite directions but united by a single musical score. On the day of the release, she organized a small concert in the store, broadcast live on social media. The response was overwhelming. From different countries, people connected by loss, and music sent messages, flowers, and donations. Among the songs on the album, one stood out for its emotional charge, La Plegaria, the same song Tessa had sung at David and Alison's wedding. Nina performed it with a mixture of trembling and strength, and when she finished, there was a silence that spoke volumes. Alison, who had silently attended the event, approached her at the end. She handed her a framed photo of Tessa from that night in the vineyard, her head uncovered and her eyes shining. "That night changed us all," she said simply. Nina accepted the gesture without rancor, because she had understood that even acts born from pain can flourish if they are transformed into art and truth. Over time, Voices Intertwined became more than just an album. It was used in schools, hospitals, and group therapy. Music teachers wrote to Nina to tell her they used the songs to talk about grief with children. A pediatric oncologist told her that every time a patient died, he played one of the recordings as a symbolic closure. "Your mother is helping to say goodbye to those who also fought like her," he wrote. Nina responded with gratitude, but also with humility. She knew Tessa hadn't been seeking glory, but rather companionship, and that was exactly what her music was generating. One day she received a handwritten letter with no return address. It read, "I never knew your mother. I found her voice by accident, but since then it accompanies me every night. Thank you for lending her to the world. Thank you for not keeping it to yourself." Nina read those words, sitting on the bench in the store where her mother often rested, looking out at the street. She wondered how many other people had been touched without even speaking, how many silences that voice had filled in unknown places. She understood that by unleashing her mother's legacy, she had made it eternal, not as something sacred and untouchable, but as something human, warm, useful, like herself. That night, as she looked over her calendar, Nina realized an important anniversary was approaching, Tessa's birthday. Instead of wallowing in sadness, she decided to celebrate it the way her mother would have wanted. She organized an outdoor concert with her students, musician friends, and neighbors. Each would perform a song that represented what Tessa had left them. They set up posters, simple lights, and a screen where they would project excerpts from their recordings. They called it The Song That Never Ends. The event spread online, and to Nina's surprise, dozens of people confirmed their attendance from other cities. The night of the concert, the sky was clear, as if even the weather wanted to cooperate. Nina opened the event with a few brief words. "Today, we don't cry for what we lost. We sing for what lives on." Then she picked up her guitar and began a soft melody she composed, inspired by Tessa's messages. As the music progressed, the audience's voices joined in. Some people lit candles, others held up photos of deceased relatives. It was as if, for a few hours, the collective grief was transformed into a vast network of comfort. From the stage, Nina felt her mother in every note, in every glance, in every shared silence. After the concert ended, Nina remained alone on stage for a few minutes. She looked at the empty chairs, the still-lit candles, the children running among the wires and sheet music. It all seemed like a daydream. She slowly stepped down, her guitar slung over her shoulder, and walked to the bench where Tessa used to sit and watch the rehearsals. She sat there, closed her eyes, and let the echo of the songs float in her chest. In that moment, she didn't feel sadness, but a deep peace, as if everything her mother had sown was bearing fruit before her. She smiled and whispered, "Happy birthday, Mom. Today we sing for you and with you." Days later, she received an unexpected email. A cultural foundation was offering financial support to expand the store project and turn it into a community music school. Nina hesitated at first. She didn't know if she was ready for something so big, but after looking through her mother's letters, she found an underlined phrase, "Never be afraid to grow, even if it hurts a little." That was the sign she needed. She accepted the proposal and began the process. It wouldn't be easy, but she no longer felt alone. She had a purpose, a story that drove her, and a community that believed in her as much as Tisa had. News of the future school spread quickly. Volunteers began to appear from all over, retirees offering to teach music theory, young people who knew how to edit audio, mothers who wanted to help with cleaning and making coffee. Nina organized weekly meetings where everyone could contribute ideas, and what began as a personal project took shape as a collective movement. At one of those meetings, a woman who had lost her daughter to leukemia raised her hand and said, "This place is giving me back something I thought was lost, the desire to get up in the morning." That phrase echoed in Nina's head for days. These stories shouldn't be forgotten. If you feel the same way, subscribe to the channel and help us keep this voice alive. When the day finally arrived to inaugurate the new space, now called the Tessa Martin School of Music and Life, Nina felt as if her heart couldn't contain so much emotion. The entrance was decorated with green and white ribbons, her mother's favorite colors. Inside, each classroom had a plaque with the name of a song Tisa had sung. In the main hall, an oil painting depicted her sitting at the piano, bareheaded and with a serene gaze. Nina gave the opening speech with a trembling but firm voice. "This school is not a monument to the past. It is a place to continue singing, to heal, to grow," as she did every day until the end. With school back in session, Nina's routine changed completely. She spent her days between classes, meetings, emails, and sheet music, but despite her tiredness, each night when she closed the doors, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The students weren't just music learners, they were people, rebuilding themselves through art. Some were playing an instrument for the first time, others were composing songs as a form of therapy. And although each story was different, they all shared one thing in common: the search for meaning. In every classroom, during every break, Tessa's spirit seemed to move gently, like a melody that no one could see, but everyone could feel. One day, while organizing an old bookshelf, Nina found a notebook she didn't remember. Upon opening it, she discovered lyrics to songs her mother had written and never shown to anyone. They were simple but deeply moving texts, full of unanswered questions, gentle consolation, and unfiltered tenderness. Among them, one stood out for its title, "When I'm Gone." Nina read it silently, her heart racing. She felt that those words were a postponed dialogue, a final conversation between mother and daughter. She decided then to set it to music. For weeks she worked on the arrangements, searching for the exact harmony that would respect Tessa's essence. She knew it wasn't just a song, it was a promise. The day she decided to record "When I'm No Longer Here," Nina closed the school at noon and posted a sign on the door: "We'll be back tomorrow. Today is the day of the heart." She entered alone into the makeshift studio they had set up months earlier in one of the side rooms. She turned on the equipment, took a deep breath, and placed the notebook with the original lyrics in front of her. Before beginning, she caressed the cover of the notebook and said softly, "Let's go together, okay?" The recording was slow, with pauses to dry tears and breathe deeply. But when she finished, she knew she had achieved something more than a song. She had closed a cycle. She had made the intangible tangible. If you've made it this far, make it worthwhile. Hit subscribe and stay with us so we can continue sharing what many keep quiet about. She uploaded the recording to platforms with a simple dedication: the song my mother couldn't sing but which lived in her soul. Today it sings through me. The response was immediate. Thousands of views, comments from around the world, spontaneous tributes. One mother wrote, "I'm undergoing treatment, and this song gave me the strength to talk to my children." A young musician commented, "Today I understood that music isn't perfection. It's true. Nina read everything with moist eyes and a full heart. She wasn't seeking fame, but by releasing that song, she had opened a door through which many other voices were also encouraged to emerge. The song's impact was such that a local television station wanted to interview Nina. At first, she hesitated. She didn't like exposure, especially when it involved something so intimate. But then she thought about Tessa, about how she had used her last performance not to hide, but to reveal herself as she really was. She accepted. The interview was recorded in the same store where it all began. Nina spoke honestly about her illness, about saying goodbye, about her legacy. She wasn't looking to dramatize, only to tell the truth. And when the journalist asked her to summarize who her mother had been in one sentence, she didn't hesitate. A woman who sang even when she no longer had the strength to hold the microphone. That phrase went viral. People unfamiliar with the story began searching for her songs, her recordings, her writings. Some radio stations asked for permission to play excerpts from the album Voces Intertwine. A publishing house was even interested in publishing a book of Tessa's letters and texts. Nina accepted, but asked to be involved in the editing. She wanted every word to be respected, for nothing to be altered to beautify what was already beautiful in its rawness. Thus was born the book Notes for When I'm Gone, which combined Tessa's writings with Nina's reflections. Upon its launch, they organized a public reading where several people read aloud the excerpts that had touched them most. It was a night of tears, but also of hope. After the book's release, many schools began requesting copies to address the topic of grief with adolescents. Nina was invited to give talks, participate in forums, and share her experiences in emotional pedagogy workshops. Although she struggled with public speaking at first, she found in these conversations a new way to channel her grief, turning it into a guide for others. Once, a young woman approached her after a talk and said, "Your story helped me reconcile with my mum before it was too late." These kinds of encounters sustained her. It wasn't just about healing her own wounds, but also about offering shelter to the wounds of others. Meanwhile, the school continued to grow. They added new disciplines, choir, creative writing, and body expression. And although Tessa's name was on the entrance, everything that happened inside also spoke of Nina. Her warmth, her dedication, her unhurried listening. One afternoon, an 8-year-old girl asked her, "Did you always want to be a teacher?" Nina smiled and replied, "No, but my mom taught me to be one without realizing it." That was the magic Tessa had left her, not just a vocation, but a way of being in the world, present, vulnerable, luminous. Over time, Tessa and Nina's story crossed borders. An independent production company was interested in adapting the book and recordings into a documentary. Nina accepted, but asked that it not focus on the illness, but on the music, the bond, the transformation. She wanted the film to speak of life, not just farewell. For months, the crew filmed scenes at the school, at the original store, at the vineyard where Tessa had last sung. They retrieved archival footage, home recordings, and old photos. Each piece fit together as if everything had been thought out from the beginning, although Nina knew nothing had been planned, only lived truthfully. The premiere day was at a small community cinema. It wasn't a gala, nor a red carpet, but for Nina, it was one of the most solemn moments of her life. Students, neighbors, family members, and even Allison and David, who sat discreetly in the back, attended. When the film ended, no one applauded immediately. There were a few seconds of deep silence, of suspended emotion. Then the audience rose and gave a standing ovation. Nina, from her seat, didn't cry. She closed her eyes and said to herself, "We did it, Mom," because she knew this documentary wasn't an end, but a new way to sing her story. After its premiere, the documentary was screened in cultural centers, independent film festivals, and art schools. It didn't win any awards, but it left its mark. In every city where it was shown, someone approached Nina to tell her how it had affected them. Some people said they called their mothers after watching it. Others confessed that for the first time they had the courage to write a letter they'd been putting off. It was as if Tessa's story opened doors that each person needed to cross at their own pace. Nina understood that the true power of art lies not in the applause, but in what it sows in silence. One day, while sweeping the schoolyard, she found a folded note among the flower pots. It was written by one of the youngest students. It read, "Thank you for teaching me that singing can also be a beautiful cry." That phrase remained posted on the bulletin board at the entrance for months. Every time Nina read it, she remembered how it all began. With a brave mother, a song in a vineyard, and a truth spoken without fear. Now that seed was multiplying, not on grand stages, but in schoolyards, in community halls, in trembling voices that dared to say, "I'm sad, but I'm still here, and I want to sing." Nina's routine no longer hurt like it used to. There were moments of nostalgia, of course, songs that still made her skin crawl, corners of the house that smelled like Tessa, dates that weighed more than she'd admit. But there was also laughter, discoveries, and good days. She learned to live with the absence like one lives with a scar. At first it hurts, then it becomes part of the map. Sometimes she found herself humming new melodies without knowing where they came from. Or she would wake up with a clear idea for a class. In those moments, she felt her mother whispering to her from some unseen corner, "Keep going, Nina. You're doing well." One night, after school closed, she decided to play the piano alone, without sheet music. She let her fingers find the notes as they wished, without rules or structures. What emerged was a mixture of all her experiences: love, grief, gratitude, exhaustion, hope. When she finished, she realized someone had left the door ajar. It was an elderly woman, a stranger with tears in her eyes. "Excuse me, I heard from the street. Can I sit down for a while?" Nina nodded and offered her tea. That night they talked for hours. They didn't know much about each other, but it wasn't necessary. They shared music, memories, and silences. It was another of those connections you don't seek, but that heal. Over the years, the Tessa Martin School established itself as a landmark in the city. What began as a small music store had become a space where hundreds of people found more than chords. They found solace, purpose, and identity. Nina was no longer just Tessa's daughter. She was a respected teacher, a sensitive composer, a woman who had transformed her pain into a legacy. And, although she sometimes still felt the weight of her absence, she also proudly acknowledged the strength she had inherited. Whenever she felt doubt, she would look at the photo of her mother in the entryway, that image with her head uncovered and her gaze steady, and she would find her center again. Another anniversary of Tessa's death was approaching, and Nina wanted to do something different. Not a ceremony, not a concert, but an open house where students could show what they had created thanks to the school. She called the event Seeds of Her Voice. They prepared exhibitions, musical performances, and small workshops. The most moving part was a room where visitors could record a message for someone who had passed away. At the end of the day, Nina sat and listened to some of them. Many were for mothers, fathers, siblings, all different, all heartfelt. Listening to them, she felt that the school was no longer just a tribute. It was a living network of shared memories. One afternoon, while organizing the younger students' music sheets, Nina found a small, unsigned letter among the pages. It was written in pencil and read, "When I grow up, I want to be like you because you make sadness sound beautiful." Reading it, Nina stood still for a moment. Then she closed her eyes and sighed. She didn't know who had written it, but she understood the message better than anyone. For a long time, she had tried to put a name to what she did, to what school meant, and there it was, summed up in a childlike, heartfelt phrase: transform pain into something that could be heard without breaking. Inspired by that letter, Nina decided to launch a new project, a collaborative album with her students. where each would sing or perform a piece that represented an important moment in their lives. Technique didn't matter, only emotion. They called it strings of the soul. For weeks, they recorded in groups, solos and duets. Some sang about grandmothers who were no longer with us, others about moving, loss and reunions. When the album was ready, they presented it at an intimate evening at the school. There were no fancy microphones or stage lights, just people sitting in a circle, listening with their hearts. And in that warm atmosphere, Nina felt Tisa's voice ringing out again, not in a recording, but in each shared story. After that night, many parents approached Nina with shining eyes. Some said it was the first time they'd seen their children express themselves so freely. Others confessed that hearing them sing, they understood emotions their children had never been able to put into words. One mother told her, "Today I learned that my daughter still misses her dad, and I learned it thanks to a song." Nina felt the project had fulfilled its purpose. It wasn't just an artistic endeavor, it was an invitation to speak from the soul. And in that process, she too healed a little more, because each shared story reminded her that she was not alone on the journey of those who lose and move on. Shortly after, Nina received an unexpected invitation. A university offered her a spot to teach an elective course on music and grief. She hesitated to accept. She had never imagined herself in a university classroom teaching adults. But then she thought about all the times Tessa had taught without meaning to, simply by being herself, and she accepted. She lovingly prepared a program, songs, excerpts from the book, emotional writing exercises, shared silences. On the first day of class, as she introduced herself, she said, "I'm not a psychologist. I just know what it feels like to have your heart shattered and find in music a way to keep breathing." The entire class fell silent. And then someone applauded. Everyone followed suit. With each passing class, Nina understood more fully the scope of the legacy she was building. She didn't just share techniques or songs. She opened spaces for others to put into words or into notes what was often hidden beneath layers of routine or shame. Some students wrote letters they never intended to send. Others recorded songs just to hear themselves cry without guilt. One afternoon, a student confessed that he had come to class thinking about giving up, but that hearing a Tessa song had stopped him. "I felt like someone, without knowing me, was speaking to me from another side of the pain." Nina didn't know what to say. She just hugged him. One long weekend, Nina returned to the vineyard in Napa Valley. The same. One where her mother had sung that last time. She had wanted to return for years, but never found the time. This time she went alone. She walked between the rows of grapes, recognizing the landscape she had seen in so many photos. She stopped in front of the small stage, now remodeled, but still with the same essence. She closed her eyes and let the silence speak to her. She didn't need to sing or record anything. She just took a deep breath, touched the ground with her hand, and murmured, "Thank you for teaching me not to fear the end or the beginning." When she opened her eyes, she felt more alive than ever. Upon returning from the vineyard, Nina decided to start a journal. Not a traditional one, but an audio one. Each night she recorded a message for herself, just as her mother had done years before. She didn't just talk about the day's events, but about what she felt, what she feared, what she longed for. Some nights she recorded in silence, letting only her breathing or the sound of the rain outside be heard. Over time, she understood that these recordings weren't just for her. They were a way to record the continuity of a legacy, that of speaking from the soul, without makeup, without posing. One afternoon, listening to one of Tessa's old notes, she found a phrase that stopped her in her tracks. It said, "Maybe what hurts me the most isn't leaving, but not knowing what you'll do with all the love I've left behind." Nina paused the recording, stared at the ceiling, and with a shy smile murmured, "I'm sewing it, Mom, everywhere." That night she shared that fragment on her social media, accompanied by a brief reflection. Thousands of people commented, shared, and expressed their gratitude. One young woman wrote, "I too inherited a love like that, and today I know I don't have to keep it all to myself." Nina knew then that the chain wasn't broken. It was only multiplying. Years passed, and with them came new generations of students. New stories, new farewells. The school remained alive because it wasn't about a person, but about a way of seeing life. Some of Nina's first students were already teachers there. One of them, in an internal ceremony, said, "Here, I didn't just learn to play an instrument. I learned not to hide what I feel." Nina listened to these testimonies with serene gratitude. She didn't need recognition. It was enough for her to know that her mother's seed continued to bear fruit, like a tree that never stops, blossoming even though no one can see its roots. On another anniversary of the school's founding, they organized a different activity. Letters to the future. Each person was asked to write a letter to be read 10 years from now. Nina also wrote hers. It was brief but honest. "If you're reading this, I hope you've kept singing. It doesn't matter if there's an audience or not. Sing to remember, to sustain, to be thankful. And if one day you feel you can't go on, return to the piano, to a front pew to Mom's voice. She always knew how to start over." Then she put it in an envelope and sealed it. As she did so, she felt a strange calm, as if closing that piece of paper was also closing another wound. One autumn morning, while walking to school wearing a scarf her mother had knitted years before, Nina passed a little girl humming a familiar tune. Listening closely, she realized it was one of Tisa's songs, but with slight, invented variations. The girl looked up and said, "My grandmother sings it to me to sleep. She tells me it was about a very brave woman." Nina smiled, crouching down to her level. "That woman was my mother," she said tenderly. The girl watched her silently, then took her hand. It was a brief moment, but one filled with meaning. The music had transcended generations, and with it, love. That same day, when she got to school, Nina decided to write a new song. She didn't yet know the lyrics or the melody. She just felt something inside her asking to, and come out. She locked herself in the room where it all began and let her fingers glide across the keyboard. What emerged was soft, intimate, like a conversation with someone who was no longer there, but still listening. She called the song Resonance. When she finished it, she knew she didn't need to record it or share it. It was just for her, a way to remember that even as time passes, some presences continue to echo deep within. A few months later, Nina was invited to give a talk at a conference on art and resilience. She accepted somewhat timidly, still struggling to see herself as a role model. But upon arriving at the auditorium and seeing so many people gathered to hear stories of transformation, she felt it was the right place. In her presentation, she didn't offer grand theories. She told the story of Tessa, of a mother who sang until the very end, of a daughter who learned not to suppress her pain. "Art didn't save me from suffering," she said, "but it helped me not to break completely. It gave me another way to inhabit what hurt me." The audience stood at the end, not because of the way she said it, but because of the truth she conveyed. Upon returning home, Nina found a package in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a blue-covered notebook, very similar to the one her mother used. When she opened it, she found scattered sentences written by different hands. They were messages from students, colleagues, neighbors, people who had passed through the school or heard her music. "Thank you for teaching me not to be ashamed to cry," read one. "Now I know I'm not alone," read another. At the end, a printed note read, "To Nina, who turned loss into a bridge. May she never stop singing, because her voice is also a home." Nina hugged the notebook to her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she cried without sadness. She cried in peace. As time passed, Nina decided to compile everything she'd experienced, the recordings, letters, projects, concerts, and put together a digital archive open to the public. She called it The Voice Continues. She didn't want it to be a museum or a solemn place, but rather an emotional library where others could be inspired, learn, and share. She uploaded audio clips, texts, photos, and sheet music, and opened a space for anyone to leave a story. Soon, stories began to arrive from all over. Mothers, children, nurses, artists, teenagers, people who had lost someone and found a kind of embrace on that page. Nina understood that it wasn't necessary to know Tisa to feel close to her. One night, while browsing that archive, she found a message from a young woman in another country who had lost her mother to the same cancer. It said, "Listening to Tisa's story gave me permission to say goodbye to mine without guilt. Thank you for sharing it. Now I know I can also live with love, even if it hurts." Nina read that message over and over again. Then she opened her mother's last recording, the one she almost never listened to because it hurt too much. But this time, she let it play through. And at the end, her voice already weakening, Tessa said, "If this voice reaches where you are, smile, because we are still together, in a different way, but together." Nina smiled, and deep down, she knew it was true. The years passed, and although Nina's face changed, her essence remained intact. There were new lines on her forehead, a more measured tone in her voice, but also a clarity that only well-cared-for scars can provide. The school was still active, now with new directors, but she remained a mentor and guide. She dedicated herself to writing, supporting creative processes, and offering what she valued most, listening. In one of her workshops, a young woman with a trembling voice confessed, "I'm afraid to sing because I feel my sadness will be noticed." Nina looked at her tenderly and replied, "That's precisely what makes your voice unique." One Sunday morning, while tidying her house, Nina found a small wooden box she didn't remember seeing before. Inside, a chain with a musical note pendant, accompanied by a faded card. "For when you feel like you've made it," it read. She recognized Tesa's handwriting immediately. She sat on the couch, the sun streaming through the window, and held the pendant between her fingers. She didn't cry. She closed her eyes and thought about everything that had happened since that first concert, since that song sung with the wig in her hand, and her voice full of truth. In that moment, deep inside, she knew that yes, she had made it. That same day, she decided to hang the chain on a special wall in the school where symbolic objects donated by students and teachers over the years were displayed. She placed the pendant in the center next to a plaque that read, "When the voice is born of love, it does not fade, it transforms." The news of the object touched many, and some visitors began leaving anonymous letters next to it. Over time, that corner became a small altar of hope, not of mourning, a place where people were reminded that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a powerful way to connect. That night, before going to sleep, Nina recorded a voice note again, as she had years before, but this time it wasn't for herself. It was for anyone who might one day feel afraid of being unable to handle their pain. She said, "You are not alone. You are not broken. You are feeling, and that means you are alive. There will be gray days, yes, but also unexpected moments of beauty. Find your song, and when you find it, sing it even if everything shakes." Then she turned off the light and went to bed with a calm heart. She didn't know if anyone would ever hear that recording, but she knew it was real, and that was enough. As time passed, some media outlets became interested in her story again. They offered to make a film based on her life and teasers. This time, Nina took her time. She didn't want something sensationalist or full of drama. She wanted the truth. After several meetings, she accepted on one clear condition, that the actress who played her mother sing live, without dubbing, without corrections. "Because my mom wasn't perfect, and neither was her voice. But she was real," she said. The crew respected that, and when the wedding scene was finally filmed, with the wig falling to the floor and the song soaring above everything, Nina couldn't hold back her tears. It was like seeing Tisa once. Again, in front of everyone, without fear. The premiere was simple, in a modest independent movie theater. but the emotion was palpable. After the film ended, many people approached her to hug her, to tell her which part had touched them the most. A young woman said she had reconciled with her father after seeing the film. A man confessed that he started singing in a neighborhood choir thanks to the story. Nina listened to them one by one, unhurriedly, her eyes shining, because she understood that all that echo wasn't just hers. It belonged to Tisa, to all those who had once sung in pain and still continued. And in that collective murmur, her mother's song continued to ring out. One ordinary afternoon, Nina was walking through a park when she heard a group of teenagers playing guitar and singing in a circle. She paused for a moment, drawn by the familiarity of the melody. To her surprise, it was a version of "When I'm No Longer Here," the song she'd composed using lyrics found in her mother's notebook. They were singing it powerfully, with laughter, without sadness. Nina discreetly approached, listened for a while, and before leaving, one of the girls recognized her. "Is that you? They taught us that song in the workshop at school." She nodded, smiling. She didn't say much. She just thanked them, because she understood that she no longer needed to explain anything. The song already belonged to everyone. On the way home, he thought about how many times he had feared that Tessa's memory would fade over the years, but now he saw that it not only lived on, but was reinventing itself, in other voices, in other versions, in new stories. Because when something is born from authenticity, it doesn't die, it transforms and multiplies. He turned on the living room light, made himself some tea, and when he sat down at the piano, he placed a new notebook on the wood. On the first page, he wrote, "Now, the story continues." And so, without the need for grand plans, he began to compose another song, not as a closure, but as a welcome to what was to come. Over the years, Nina became a silent role model for many. She didn't seek the spotlight, but her presence inspired. She was invited to rural schools, cultural centers, and small festivals where music was more about heart than industry. There she shared stories, sang with the audience, and read excerpts from Tisa's diary. Sometimes she sat in the audience, like just another member, and let others take center stage. She enjoyed watching new talents flourish in spaces where before there had been only silence. She liked to think her mother would be proud, not because of the applause, but because of the honesty with which everything was sustained. One day, at the end of a workshop in a small town, a little girl timidly approached and handed her a drawing. It was a piano floating in the sky, surrounded by clouds shaped like musical notes. Below, a figure with short hair smiled as it looked up. "It's your mom," the girl said, unsure of how right she was. Nina hugged the paper as if it were a treasure. She quietly thanked him, and upon looking at the drawing again, she felt connected to something larger. Tessa was no longer just a memory. She was part of a collective imagination that continued to grow, and that, she understood, was true immortality. Over time, Nina began writing a new book. This time it wasn't about Tessa, nor about grief. It was about what came next, about rebuilding herself, about discovering who she was without the shadow of constant pain. She wrote in the mornings, with her first cup of coffee, and sometimes in the evenings, after listening to an old recording or witnessing something that reminded her of the simple beauty of living. The title was clear from the start, After the Echo, because she understood that there was a moment when the resonance of the past became a driving force, not an anchor. When she finished the manuscript, she didn't look for a publisher. She printed it herself in a small format, almost like a travel journal. She shared it with friends, with students, with people who had been with her from the beginning. One of them, upon finishing reading it, said to her, "This book doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like sitting down to talk with someone who has learned to live with all its versions." Nina smiled, because that was exactly what she had wanted. For whoever read it to think not of loss, but of process, not of open wounds, but of new skin, more sensitive but also stronger. The school, though larger and with new equipment, still had the same scent: wood, paper, freshly brewed tea. Nina walked through its halls with the familiarity of someone who has sown every corner with a little of herself. Sometimes she would stop in front of the display case that housed the musical note pendant and stay there for a few minutes, in silence. It wasn't nostalgia, it was gratitude, a reminder that even the smallest thing, a gesture, a song, a truth spoken at the right time, can mark an entire life. And hers had been marked, transformed, and rewritten by that invisible chain that linked her voice to Tisa's. One afternoon at the end of a class, a teenage student approached her and asked, "Does it still hurt?" Nina didn't need any clarification. She knew she was talking about absence. She thought for a few seconds before answering, "Yes, but it doesn't stop me from breathing anymore. Sometimes it even drives me." The girl nodded and left silently. Nina stared at the empty classroom, that phrase bouncing in her chest. She understood that although pain never completely disappears, it becomes part of the landscape, and that she had learned not only to live with it, but to walk with it hand in hand, without fear. Winters and springs passed, and with them came new voices, new challenges, new beginnings. Nina no longer felt the need to record everything, to save every gesture or every letter. She had learned to trust. The memory of the heart, the one that doesn't need archives to know what matters. Every now and then, someone would speak to her about Tessa as if she was still there. "Your mum said," or "Your mum once told me," and Nina would smile without correcting herself. Because in a way, Tessa was still speaking, not from an altar, but from the everyday, from every person she had unknowingly touched. One day, while organizing old materials, she found a notebook where her mother had written a single sentence. "If you ever wonder why I did all this, it was so you would know you were enough." Nina read it several times, as if by repeating it she could feel her closer. Then she wrote underneath, "I knew it, Mom. I know it. And thanks to you, many other people are beginning to know it too." She closed the notebook, put it in a special drawer, and turned on the light in the rehearsal room. Outside, dusk was falling, and inside, the music was starting up again, because that's how it had always been, one song after another, without end. On one of the school's founding anniversaries, the students prepared a surprise for her, a song they all composed, featuring fragments of lines Nina had said over the years. They titled it, "Singing is Also Staying." When she heard it for the first time, surrounded by faces young and old, Nina couldn't hold back her tears. Every verse was a mirror, every note a hug. She realized that, without planning it, she had left a mark as deep as the one her mother had left on her, and that now that chain of love continued to grow like a choir that never dissolves. At the end of the presentation, one of the teachers handed her a new notebook. "It's so you can keep writing, because there's still more to tell," he said. Nina held it carefully, like someone receiving a seed. She no longer felt the pressure of filling pages, but rather the joy of knowing there would always be something new to say. Because life continued beating, singing, mutating, and as long as there was someone willing to open their soul and fine-tune their voice, Tissa's story and her own would continue to be written, not as an echo of the past, but as a living melody in the present. Years later, now well into her mature years, Nina decided to record a new album, not as a tribute, but as a testament to the journey she'd taken. She called it After the Silence. It included her own compositions, collaborations with former students, and even an intimate version of La Plegaria, the song that shaped her family history. This time, she sang it not as a farewell, but as a welcome to everything she'd experienced. Her voice was deeper, more measured, but also more confident. Listening to herself, she felt proud, not for her technique, but for the courage to have reached this point without losing her tenderness. The day of the release was a sunny afternoon, without any grand decorations. The venue was packed with people who had been with her throughout her life. Nina took the stage, took a deep breath, and said, "This album isn't about grief. It's about what is built when we decide to stay." Then she sang one of the new songs, written from a voice note she found on her cell phone, where years ago she had accidentally recorded a shared laugh with Tessa. When she finished, there was silence, the kind that doesn't bother you, the kind that embraces, and then a slow, warm applause, full of respect. Nina left the stage with a light heart. She knew she no longer had anything to prove. After the concert, Nina walked alone through the neighborhood streets. She passed the old music store, now part of the school complex, and stopped in front of the display case. There was still the old piano, the black and white photos, and the sign that read, "Mum's voice is still here." She smiled, touched the glass with her fingertips and murmured, "It's still in me too." She didn't need further proof. She knew that every step she'd taken, even the most uncertain, had been guided by that first note Tessa taught her, to be authentic, even in the midst of pain. That night, when she returned home, she found a handwritten letter in her mail. It was from a stranger who had recently lost her sister. She said she had found the book, Notes for When I'm Gone, in a public library, and that upon reading it, something inside her changed. "Thank you for lending us your story," she wrote, "because sometimes, to find the courage to live, you need to know that someone else has also done it with a broken heart." Nina left the letter on the table, made some tea, and remained silent for a long moment. Not out of sadness, but out of fulfillment, because she understood that the cycle had been fulfilled, and that she was no longer just Tessa's daughter, she was her continuation. Over time, Nina began to gradually withdraw from public life, not out of fatigue, but because she felt she had already given what was necessary. She continued teaching, but in smaller groups. She wrote, but without rushing. Her life became simpler, more contemplative. She enjoyed evening walks, aimless rehearsals, and spontaneous visits from former students. She had found a balance that didn't seek external validation. One day, a journalist insisted on interviewing her about Tessa Martin's legacy. Nina accepted but amended the title. "It's about what we did together, not what one of us left behind." During the interview, she was asked if she was afraid that over the years, people would forget Tessa. Nina shook her head and replied, "It's not necessary for everyone to remember her. It's enough that her way of being remains present in those who knew her story. In a song sung in a classroom, in a letter written with love, in a hug given at the right time." The journalist was silent for a few seconds and then thanked her. It was a response she hadn't expected, but one that deeply moved her, because she understood that not all legacies make a resounding impact. Some spread like a soft melody but impossible to forget. One ordinary afternoon, Nina received an unexpected visitor, a young woman with a guitar slung over her shoulder, visibly nervous. She said she was from another city, that she had heard her songs at university, and that she needed to talk to her. Nina invited her in, offered her tea, and listened attentively. The girl explained that she had recently lost her mother, and that Tessa's recordings and Nina's lyrics had sustained her through the worst of days. "I didn't come to ask you for anything," she said. "I just wanted to thank you in person." Nina looked at her tenderly, stood up, and hugged her without saying a word, because she understood that kind of pain, and also that kind of gratitude. Before leaving, the young woman asked her to sing a song together. They chose Resonance. They sat in the living room, picked up their guitars, and began to play. At first, their voices didn't quite sync up, but little by little, they aligned, and when they finished, there was a beautiful silence full of connection. The young woman said goodbye between tears and smiles, and Nina was left alone, staring at her guitar with a full heart. She had understood something simple and profound, that the act of sharing what she's experienced not only brings relief, but also ignites other voices, and that, as long as there is someone willing to sing, the story will continue. In her later years, Nina kept a small notebook on her nightstand. She didn't write every day, only when something moved her soul. There she recorded phrases she heard, gestures that moved her, unexpected lessons learned. One night she wrote, "We are not what we lose, We are what we choose to build with that. And underneath, she drew a musical note, like Tessa did in her letters. It was her way of closing each thought with music, of maintaining that invisible thread between them. She didn't know if anyone would ever read that notebook, but she didn't care. She wrote it simply for the sake of continuing to listen to herself. When she felt her story was complete, Nina organized her things with the same delicacy she had seen in her mother. She left letters, recordings, simple instructions, not out of fear of leaving, but out of love for those who would stay behind. One spring morning, she simply didn't wake up. She left in peace, like someone who knows she'd said it all, sung it all. Her departure wasn't a tragedy, it was a continuation, because she had already sown everything necessary for her voice and Tessa's to continue resonating. At the wake, held at the school, there was no mourning. There was music, hugs, photos, stories. Former students traveled from far away. Teachers performed songs she had written, and in one of the rooms recordings of the two played on loop, mother and daughter singing a duet, separated by time, united by soul. Many cried, yes, but with a smile on their faces, because they understood that it wasn't a passing but another form of presence. The school is still open. Every time a new student enters, someone tells her the story. Not to make her cry, but to remind her that this place was founded by women who didn't hide their pain, who sang even when they trembled, and who left on every wall, in every note, in every silence, a clear promise. As long as there is someone willing to sing from the heart, no goodbye is forever. If this story stayed with you until the end, please do something for it. Subscribe, share it, and leave your comment, because that's the only way we can continue telling it.